Hello, and welcome to Stitches and Stories Studio, where we talk about everything involved in taking your story from first draft to first reader. I'm your host, author Melissa L. Story, but you can call me Millie. I've been an indie author and publisher since 2017, and I started this podcast because I enjoy sharing my experiences, talking about what I've learned so far, and hopefully making the writing and publishing journey feel a little less lonely for those who are still finding their way. This week, I want to talk about growing your writing and you growing as a writer. When we first began learning, when we first began, we're concerned about learning the craft. We work very hard at getting everything right, reading books and listening to podcasts, joining online groups and attending workshops. Taking the craft very seriously is important and certainly a good habit to get into right from the start. But the desire to get everything right can also be a trap. You don't want to let yourself become so afraid of making a mistake that you never finish anything. When I decided to turn all of the notebooks on my shelf into actually published books, I did the same thing. I created my own little writing curriculum. I read every how-to book I could find, attended lectures and local conferences, book events. I met other authors, joined groups, and tried to connect with people who were at the same stage of writing that I was and was also eager to learn. One of the most important things I eventually learned was that there's no point at which someone hands you a certificate and says, "Congratulations, you now know everything there is to know about writing." I mean, it would be totally cool if that did happen, but there's just too much to learn and it's always evolving. So you're always going to be learning something. Now, your basics and your foundation will, of course, remain the same. So we'll get to more of that in just a few minutes. But before that, I wanted to give you a quick personal update before we get too far along. You may remember from the previous episode that a tiny kitten named Pearl recently joined our household. Pearl is now about 5 weeks old. She's exploring her new home and the world with the confidence of someone who's never considered that she is only 2 ounces long. 2 ounces. Our 7-year-old male Tabby has appointed himself her official guardian and big brother. Pearl, however, doesn't feel that she needs one of those. She is happy to climb aboard our Great Pyrenees, who weighs 115 pounds and has paws the size of Pearl. And I'm fairly certain that he is more afraid of her than she could ever possibly be of him. So our house is going through a little bit of adjustment, and if you hear any sudden crashes or noises in the background, that's just Pearl exploring. So until Pearl is large enough to explore the rest of the house safely and not get stuck behind the refrigerator or something, her home base is my office. She eats every 4 hours. She's been to the vet, and she'll be back soon for another recheck on her growth status. She was the smallest of her litter and very fragile when I brought her home, but I was determined not to let this amazingly small creature be handed off to animal control and put into an already overcrowded shelter system. More big news, possibly some of the biggest news, is that beginning in August, this podcast is going to have a little update. Now, the heart of the show, of course, is going to remain the same. We're still talking about becoming an author, improving our craft, and publishing our work, building a creative and author career that we enjoy and gives us the reason to get up in the morning. All of that's going to stay the same. But for a while, I kind of felt like the presentation of this podcast sounded slightly more formal and academic than I really intended it to. I mean, academia is really not my style. So writing and publishing, I feel, can be challenging enough. We should be able to relax and laugh and enjoy the learning experience. So beginning in August, this podcast is going to become The Salty Writer. Now, the name of that is inspired by the Chesapeake Bay, which has shaped the region where I grew up and still live. Bay is part of our history, economy, and our identity here. And some people might suggest that the name is more reflective of my humor and personality, but I will let you decide. But don't worry, Stitches and Stories has not gone anywhere. It's still here. It's still the umbrella organization for everything that I do. Stitchesandstories.com is still the hub. It's still where you find my online store, my blog, and everything else that I'm working on. You can still email me at millie@stitchesandstories.com. Don't forget, Millie is spelled Milly. And of course, you can find me on all the normal social channels as Melissa L. Story. I've created some new artwork for the Salty Writer that incorporates elements from the original Stitches and Stories logo, and I can't wait for you to see that because I think it's pretty cute. The change also happens to fit with today's conversation pretty well. It's about writers and stories and businesses as they evolve, so stay tuned for more on that because right now we're going to get into our weekly segment about rock and roll history this week in the 1980s. So, first up, July 25th, 1983, Metallica released their debut album, Kill 'Em All. Of course, that album helped introduce a much heavier, faster style of metal to the growing audience, and it marked the beginning of what obviously became an enormous career for the band. I mean, I can remember in high school, I had a friend who loved their music so much that he was constantly playing it on his guitar. I don't know if he could play anything else, but he could certainly play Metallica. Then on July 27th, 1981, going back a couple of years, Stevie Nicks released her debut solo album, Belladonna. Now, I'm a huge Stevie Nicks fan, and I could be slightly biased here, but Belladonna proved that Stevie Nicks could be a major star without Fleetwood Mac. And then on July 27th, 1993, Madonna released her self-titled debut album. And that album didn't meet well with critics, but it did gain a lot of momentum through dance clubs, and it certainly helped launch the career of one of the most defining pop stars of the decade. So here we have three artists, three very different sounds, and three careers that continue to grow and change today, which is a very good reminder that evolution does not mean everyone eventually starts sounding alike. They all sounded very different when they started. Maybe Metallica hasn't changed so much, but certainly you can hear a difference between Madonna and uh, Stevie Nicks. Sorry. So, what were some of your favorite songs from the early 80s? Where did you enjoy listening? I know my Gen Xers are out there. Were you driving along the beach, hanging out by a bonfire, cruising up and down the boulevard, maybe sitting by a lake, hanging out in somebody's basement with a stack of records and a bowl of chips, maybe even watching some MTV? Which one was your favorite? Share your favorite memory, and I'll mention it on a future episode. Now, today's main conversation is going to be about evolving as a writer. I know some of you are thinking, hey, I'm just starting out. I can't evolve yet. I'm just getting there. But I disagree. You begin evolving the first day you start writing, the day you sit down and seriously attempt to turn an idea into a story. Every day that you write, read, research, revise, or do something related to your writing contributes to that growth. And you don't have to wait until you've published 5 books. You don't have to even wait till you have an agent or a contract. You're growing now, and you might not be able to see it, but trust me, if you're beyond day 2, you're growing. And you don't have to get everything right the first time. Part of growth is learning as you go. And of course, you should absolutely do the best you can on your first book and learn the craft and listen to thoughtful feedback and hire the best writer you can reasonably afford. I mean, the best editor you can reasonably afford. But, the person you are today is not the same person you will be in 10 years. And that's okay because everybody has to start somewhere. Nobody got into this knowing everything there was to know about writing. I mean, that's just not even possible. So if you spend forever trying to make book 1 contain everything you think you should eventually know, it's never going to get published. It's going to stay on your computer. Your first book only has to represent the best work you can do with the experience, resources, and the knowledge you possess at that point in your life. Book 10 will eventually be written by a different version of you, and you have no way of knowing what that version is going to be yet. So give yourself a break and focus on the book in front of you right now. That writer will is going to finish an amazing book and is going to learn so much along the way. And when you look back, you're going to smile and remember how nervous you felt and how silly it was to feel that nervous. Now, of course, it didn't feel like it now at the time because nothing sends panic through your system like getting ready to hit the publish button on your computer. But that doesn't really go away. You can be the most confident writer, but when you actually have to push that button to put a book out there in the world, you still get goosebumps a little bit, trust me. So just if we have the previously defined success for ourselves, and we've talked about that, we need to define what growth looks like for ourselves as well. I mean, it's different for everybody. The growth for one writer may mean learning how to finish a complete draft, while another might need to learn how to slow down and let a scene breathe a little bit. Maybe someone else has trouble writing dialogue, character depth, controlling the pacing, or just stop editing the opening chapter long enough to get to chapter 2. And all of these things count. All of these things count towards your personal growth as a writer. Dialogue, for example, is one that some people struggle with. Now, to me, it comes naturally, but that doesn't mean I haven't had some struggles with it. I like to talk. I like to have conversations. I like to listen to other people's stories. That's how I relate to people, is by sharing similar experiences. But in my early writing, I was using a lot of dialogue tags. So a lot of he said, she asked, he replied after every sentence. And I thought, this is breaking it up in the mind of the reader, that it was causing too much interference. And I needed to kind of smooth it out a little bit. So I started taking out some of those dialogue tags. And of course, I swung completely the other way, as you do when you're a young writer, young in your journey. And it got to the point where my editor was telling me, I can't tell who's talking here. I need a dialogue tag, or I need something to tell me who's talking. And so, in trying to balance out not having too many dialogue tags, trying to keep the story flowing without interrupting the reader, but also organizing the conversation, I started adding um, little things ahead of the character's actual language. So, listen to this conversation. There's two people in the room, Matt and Angela. Matt, I've got a problem and I need your help. Okay, anything for a friend. What's the problem? My ex is harassing me. Now, you can kind of tell who's talking because I told you there's only two people in the room. But what did you learn from that conversation? Angela has an ex that's harassing her, and Matt's a good friend. I mean, it's good information, but it's a little flat. Now, what if we read it this way? Matt, I've got a problem. I need your help, Angela said. Okay, anything for a friend. What's the problem? Matt asked. My ex is harassing me, Angela said. Hmm, I don't know. Doesn't really do much for me. How about you? But what if we do this? Matt, I've got a problem and I need your help. Okay, anything for a friend. What's the problem? Angela sighed heavily. My ex is harassing me. So that small action, Angela sighing. One, it identifies the speaker. And two, it adds some emotion to the scene. So we don't know a lot about the room that they're in. We don't know if there's other people around. Are they at home? Are they in an office? Where are they at? But we do know that Angela is having some emotion. So we know that she's either frustrated or frightened or tired or maybe all of the above. She could possibly be reluctant to ask for help from Matt, even though he's a friend. So while there's still a lot of unanswered questions, the sigh adds some emotion, and that helps uh, get the reader a little bit more invested in what's happening here. I mean, they could have just read through that. Angela said, Matt asked, you know, Angela replied. Big deal. But now we know there's some emotional investment in this problem. And we don't know yet what Matt's reply is going to be, but we know it's going to be in response to an emotional request. So it gives a little bit more reason for the reader to read on and not just set it down. Not he said, she said, he asked, she asked. They'll probably close the page and get bored. But maybe now with this little bit of one, identifying who's talking, and two, that they're talking with emotion, get the reader to stay invested in the story and read on to see what happens next. So if dialogue is a challenge for you, give that a try. See how it works. It may not be your style, but breaking it up to something different might lead you to something that does work for you, even if it isn't this particular tool. So another way we grow is by learning our own style. And people often call this finding your voice, which can be confusing for a new writer because they don't understand what that means. But basically, finding your voice is finding your style. So it's not something that you manufacture, it's kind of what's part of you. And it develops through the choices that you make repeatedly in your stories. It sometimes appears in ways that you either structure sentences or the details that you include, that you notice for the surroundings of the scene. Maybe it's about the subjects that you interest you. Maybe you bring them up repeatedly in your stories. Maybe as a major part of the story. Maybe it's just a side note. One of the best ways that you can recognize your voice is when you put your draft away after you finished it, while it's resting before you start your self edits. When you go back to read that, you you will start seeing patterns develop in the story. Some of them you may want to keep, some of them may not, and that's part of that growth. But that's also helping to refine your voice as well. One of the things in my voice and my writing voice is when I write about female characters, they're always strong female characters. They're kicking ass one way or the other, either metaphorically or literally. Um, but I always write from a strong female character point of view um, when I get to that part of the story. So, and not that the guys in the story are wimps; they certainly aren't. But neither are the girls. So they might get rescued emotionally or physically, but they usually get there because they were probably taking something a little too far. But recognizing your own fingerprints on the page is important, and it does take time to develop, and it's still going to feel confusing in the beginning, but you'll start seeing these patterns, these threads. And I'd say by book 3, you'll definitely have it down. So you've continued learning, you've worked with editors, and you've experimented with many different techniques, and you've become confident in some areas and more aware of weaknesses in others. And that's critical in growth, is recognizing some of your own areas where you could maybe do better. Maybe you have some challenges with certain things, and admitting that and addressing those things only makes you a better writer. And when you look back, maybe years from after writing your first book, you can go, wow, that story was wonderful, but look how much my writing has changed. And that's amazing. You get to book 10 and you look back at book 1 and you can see the differences and you can see how much you've grown. It doesn't take away anything from book 1. If anything, it adds to it, because book 1 is even that more amazing, that you knew so little at that time compared to what you know at book 10, and you still wrote this fabulous story. And I think that's the greatest gift you can give yourself. So we often measure writing growth by looking at the words on the page, and we notice maybe stronger dialogue, cleaner sentences. And of course, those are all signs of our growth and evolution. Y- And, and as you're going through and editing too, just a quick side note, and as you grow and you take advice from beta readers or your editor, and you start to discard or paragraphs or cut something out, save those in a separate file. Don't just delete them. Readers like blooper reels, just like moviegoers like blooper reels. So save them because you can use those as a marketing tool later. And we're going to be getting into marketing soon, and this will become more evident then. But just pro tip right now: anything you delete or cut, save it somewhere in the file. Um, and for a couple of reasons. One, you can entertain yourself with them, 6 months after the book's published or something like that. But they also are great uh, marketing items, marketing tools. So don't just delete those and let them go into the trash bin on your computer. You also uh, grow when you begin to understand your own process. Um, Perhaps you once believed that you had to write every day because someone on the internet said only real writers write every day, but your life and your schedule doesn't allow for that. Maybe you work better in longer sessions 3 days a week, or every day, but in very short bursts, or some combination in between. Um, Perhaps you're a strict planner and you learn later that maybe you need to learn to leave room for discovery. Excuse me. Sorry. Um, but so changing your process is adaptation. It's not failure. It's not that you did anything wrong. It's just that you learn what's best for you, and it may not even be the same from book to book. Depending on what you're writing, how much research goes into it. What comes out of book one leads to into book two. Um, Maybe you don't have to do as much research because you've got a lot of foundation done already. So the time you spend researching versus the time you spend writing changes, and that changes your schedule. So it changes from book to book. So you can't even say that, just because I did this book one is the way I have to write book two. Um, but you do need to be able to recognize that about yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting yourself along the way. So allow yourself some grace and allow yourself some room to grow. Now, growth is not always a straight line. I mean, it sounds easy when I'm sitting here saying, do this, do this, do that. And and even when I'm telling you that, take it with a grain of salt. Find what works for you because I might be telling you what works for me or what works for a couple of people that I know, um, works for someone else, but you don't have to do it exactly the way anyone says, including me. But use it as guidance, give it a try because if you haven't found what works yet, try something that someone else suggests and eliminate it until you find the thing that does work for you. And it might um, not work for you, but maybe it might spark an idea of what could work. And so, you find success and growth that way. I mean, we all need to let go of the idea that each book is going to automatically be easier than the previous one. And that simply just isn't necessarily true. I mean, it could be. And if it is, celebrate it, enjoy it. Um, but each book is its own, at least for me, is its own project, even though it's a continuation of a story because I do write in series. But, sometimes book two or book three is a struggle. Book one may have been easy because the idea was fresh and I was on fire. I'm like, yeah. And then I get to it. I'm like, ugh, okay, now what happens? Where's the logical progression in the story? I know where I want it to begin. I know where I want it to end, but now I got to sort out the middle parts. And sometimes that can be very challenging. So you just kind of have to roll with it in a way, which I know is not helpful advice, but you just kind of take each book as its own challenge, and you may, learn something new from each book, which eventually may help books down the road become easier. But I still find for me, um, you know, I've written a trilogy on book two of a 10 book series, and I've written 9 books in a romance series under Lynn's story. And, they all had similar challenges. The process was the same for me, but um, they all have their own struggles and how to get the characters to play dice together and make sure my story arc is working and that kind of thing. So those sorts of things sort of become easier to identify, which I guess is good because I know what I can write easily and what I need to pay more attention to and spend extra time on. Um, so, going from book one to book two and having it be its own sort of learning experience doesn't mean that all the skills that you learned in book one have disappeared and you have to relearn anything. It's just you're building on those. Book two offers you a different set of skills that you now may need to learn. And that's amazing. That's awesome and it should be celebrated. So, even an experienced writer may sometimes struggle more because experience allows us to see complications that we didn't notice we weren't in the beginning, maybe. And we tend to start overthinking things. But we do understand more of what a story can become. And if you're ever curious or you're struggling with where you want your story to go, I do encourage you to try this technique that I do. So I get stuck, write the ending. I don't care what chapter you're on. You're on chapter one. Write the ending. How do you see the story ending? What do you see happening for your characters? Write the ending, and the ending may change, but it gives you a goal to work towards, and it helps you kind of frame what happens in between. You've got the beginning. Beginnings are usually easy. Sometimes we kind of get lost in the middle, and it will show in your writing if you're struggling. My editor will tell me, "Hey, I see by chapter 15, you were really struggling." It does show through in your writing. So sit down, try writing the beginning and the end. It might just be a page. It doesn't have to be a lot of detail, but beginning and the end. And then frame the rest of your writing as filling in the gaps in between and see how that works for you. And you may not need to do that every time, but just know that's a tool that you can use if you need to, if you start getting stuck or if you're not sure what direction you need the story to go into. Um, you know, Plot elements can move from one book to another. Characters have revealed parts of themselves that I didn't all necessarily understand when I first created them. And, maybe get into book two or book three, and they really start to develop into these um, people that I wasn't expecting, which is awesome. That's what makes writing fun. I'm a character driven writer, not plot driven. It means I rely heavily on my characters and they come to me first. So um, my books show up in my head as little movies. I'll see little scenes in my head with these characters. Sometimes they have names when they form in my head. Sometimes I have to work that out later. But I'll see a scene, I'll see something happening in my head, and I need to write a story around that. And that happens throughout the process of the book because once I get started, then I start imagining um, what the characters would do next. And, I sit staring out the window, daydreaming about it, and I'm kind of playing these little movies in my head about these scenes and what the characters are doing and how they're evolving and, consequences of their actions and, if that, then this sort of scenario. So, um, that's just kind of how my brain works. And if that's the way your brain works too, we're in good company together. Um, some people are plot driven and it's more about writing the story of what's happening and then kind of adding the characters in kind of as secondary. As I understand it, is the way it was explained to me. Um, so if that's that's great, but you're also probably one of those people that might struggle a little bit with the dialogue. So, um, and that's okay. That's okay because now you can identify what's easy for you to write and the things you need to go back and focus on. So just write it in layers. So draft one is getting that plot out there and all the descriptions that you want to say and all the information. And then second go around, draft version two can be taking all of that information and having your characters convey it instead of you just writing a description. So suddenly it's a third person narrative, um, you know, but there's no people, in that story. So you go back and add the people and take some of those descriptions that you wrote and give them to your character. Make them dialogue, put quotes around and make them dialogue and have the characters convey that information. I kind of do it in reverse. So I have the characters first and then go back and add the scenes around it, those, senses like sight, smell, taste, hearing, for a particular scene. I add that second. So how do you recognize your own progress? Because we all want to grow and we all want to evolve and be better writers. So if you've been writing for a while and you feel as though you're not improving, um, get a critique partner or disinterested second party and just give them maybe a chapter or two from maybe book one and whatever book you're currently working on or recently published and ask them to compare them and see what they think. See if they notice any differences. Your editor could do this if you're on a good relationship with your editor and they have time to kind of make that comparison for you. Ask them what you think. Always, just another side note, if you can find an editor where you can kind of build up this personal relationship with them, it's so worth it. So worth it. I spent hours talking with mine either on FaceTime or over the phone, and we exchange emails about, you know, nothing related to books. We share vacation photos and things like that. So that relationship with your editor, having that person become a friend is priceless. I mean, it's absolutely priceless. Now, she's a friend, but I still pay her when she edits. You know, I still, it's still a business in that side, but the other side of the coin is, you know, we're friends and we can talk about stuff and I can ask her, what did you think about that outside of the editing mode? And she'll tell me, you know, and it's great. It's great information. Might sting a little bit in the beginning because we all want to think that, we're perfect in our writing, but um it's okay because it comes, in that relationship, it's coming from a good place, a positive place, a place of love. So um that's valuable information. Or if you have a family member who's willing to be not sugarcoat things with you. My husband's also really good at that. He's not about sugarcoating anything. So he's also a good sounding board. And he doesn't get paid, but he's an excellent sounding board for ideas or, you know, I try to explain something and if he tells me that makes my head hurt, I know I need to go back and work on that. So find somebody like that in your life, a friend, a relative, um, or develop a relationship with an editor and be able to have those conversations, a critique partner, a fellow writer, you know, that you trust. And, some people wear the heart on the sleeve like me, and some people have much thicker skin and can take it. I've developed thicker skin in this business, but it's still, my heart's still out there. So, protect your heart while asking for honest feedback. Just let people know, hey, I need your honest feedback, but I don't want it to be brutal. I just need it to be honest. So it's another good way to control your own growth in this business. And you know, it's not helpful if it's brutal and it belittles you or makes you feel uh, less in some way as a writer. That's not going to help you grow. So you don't need that kind of feedback. You need honest feedback, but you need someone to understand how to deliver that feedback in a way that's positive. And you need to be your best advocate for yourself in that. So to the writer who is only beginning, trust me, it doesn't feel like it, but you're already evolving. You don't need a publishing contract or a bestseller badge to count your growth. Every scene teaches you something. Every revision is going to sharpen your instincts for the future. And every mistake gives you some information to work with. So every time you return to the page after doubt, distraction, disappointment, exhaustion, or a long day, or maybe an evening with one very determined kitten demanding dinner, you're becoming a writer who can finish the next book. May not be able to see the distance you've traveled while you're in the middle of it, but today's 10-minute writing session, the paragraph that you struggled to finish and maybe it didn't look impressive at the time, or the chapter you deleted in that first work, those are all small efforts that accumulate over time. And they're going to help build your growth. You'll see hundreds of ordinary days that don't feel important at the time, but when you look back a year from now, you're going to find out how valuable all of those days were. So I'm going to leave it at that today. And I want to thank you for spending time with me here at Stitches and Story Studio. And don't forget, in August, we're switching the name and we're going to become the Salty Writer. The name's changing, but our conversations about publishing creativity and building that author life, of course, will continue. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following the podcast, sharing it with another writer, or leaving a rating or review wherever you listen. Those small actions help new listeners discover the show more than you might think. And also, if you're feeling generous, you can support my work financially by purchasing one or more of my books. You can subscribe to my Substack page or buy me a coffee / Melissa L. Story. You can find my books, newsletters, social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Substack, all under Melissa L. Story. And again, feel free to reach out at Millie, MILLY, at stitchesandstories.com. So until next time, keep writing, keep asking all those questions, and remember, writing's what happens when curiosity is given a keyboard.